Sean Diddy Combs,
Right.
would you consider pardoning him?
Well, he was essentially, I guess, sort of half innocent.
Yes.
I don't know what they do.
When the news broke that Sean Diddy Combs had been convicted, fans and critics alike were stunned. But what made it even more shocking? It wasn't the sex trafficking or racketeering charges that brought him down. Those were thrown out. Instead, it was something far more unexpected. 2 counts of transporting individuals across state lines for sex, under a law most people hadn't heard of, the Mann Act. In a 2-month-long trial, filled with disturbing details, explosive testimony, and never-before-seen footage, prosecutors painted Diddy as the mastermind of a twisted criminal operation. They said he used his power and fame to control women, manipulate them, and force them into wild, drug-fueled sex parties. These weren't just any parties. They were referred to in court as freak-offs and hotel nights, involving male escorts, entertainers, and a lot of silence from the people who once trusted him most. But here's where things take a sharp turn. Despite the mountain of accusations, the jury didn't buy the most serious claims. They cleared him of racketeering. They cleared him of sex trafficking. That means the core of the government's case, the idea that Diddy ran a 20-year criminal empire, didn't hold up in court. So why was he still convicted? The answer lies in the Mann Act, a century-old law that's rarely used today. The jury decided that Diddy did arrange for 2 people to travel for sex, and that's all it took to land him behind bars. No proof of force, no proof of money changing hands, just movement across state lines and sexual activity. That alone sealed his fate. It's the kind of legal twist no one saw coming, and it's raised a massive question. Was Diddy targeted, or was this justice finally served? But the strange legal twist was just the beginning. You've probably never heard of the Mann Act, and neither had most people until Diddy's case brought it back into the spotlight. Originally passed in 1910, the Mann Act was meant to stop human trafficking, especially the movement of women across state lines for immoral purposes. Back then, it was aimed at real exploitation. But over the years, it's become a gray area in U.S. law, only used in rare and very specific cases. In Diddy's case, prosecutors didn't need to prove violence, coercion, or even profit. All they needed to show was that he arranged for someone, whether it was a girlfriend or a hired escort, to travel between states to have sex. That alone was enough for a conviction. And that's exactly why this case is blowing up online, because Diddy's team isn't just denying the charges. They're saying the entire conviction is unconstitutional. In their latest court filing, they claim Diddy is the only person in America who's ever been convicted under the Mann Act without coercion, without profit, and without any underage victims involved. They're calling it a political hit job, a setup, a smear campaign designed to take him down when the bigger charges fell apart. According to his lawyers, there was no criminal motive. The adults involved chose to travel. They agreed to the sexual activity. There was no money exchanged for sex, and Diddy, he wasn't even present during most of the encounters. So why was he still convicted? His defense says it's simple. Because he's Sean Diddy Combs, a high-profile figure with enemies in the industry and a target on his back. They argue that if anyone else had done the same thing, it wouldn't even make it to court, let alone result in a conviction. But that wasn't the only bombshell. Because once the freak-offs were introduced in court, the entire case took a darker turn. This is where the story shifts from strange to disturbing. In court, prosecutors revealed a hidden world behind Diddy's glamorous empire. A world they claimed was fueled by control, drugs, and carefully choreographed sex rituals. They weren't just wild parties. They had names, freak-offs, and hotel nights. According to the testimony, these weren't spontaneous hookups. These were planned events, coordinated, executed, and always with one person in control, Diddy. Male escorts, some called entertainers, others flat out referred to as escorts, were allegedly flown across state lines to meet up with women Diddy was romantically involved with. The goal? Sex, drugs, and recording the entire thing on video. The prosecution played parts of those tapes in court, Some jurors reportedly looked shaken, others looked confused. But the defense? They weren't shaken at all. They called it amateur porn, nothing more. They argued that these recordings were consensual, part of a swinger lifestyle, and fully legal. No one was forced, no one was paid for sex, no laws were broken. At least, not in the way the prosecution claimed. To them, these videos weren't proof of a crime, they were evidence of personal preference, creative, intricate, choreographed. Those were the words used by Diddy's legal team. And if you're thinking that sounds like a reach, consider this. They went so far as to claim the footage was protected by the First Amendment. In other words, they said what happened wasn't illegal, it was expression. But here's the problem. Those same videos were also described by the women involved as tools of manipulation. They testified that Diddy used them as leverage, threatening to release the footage if they ever spoke out or disobeyed him. He controlled the narrative, the relationships, and the camera. So, what do you believe? Was this a case of consenting adults living out a fantasy? Or was it a carefully masked power play caught on tape? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear to the jury. The footage was real, but was it criminal? The next twist would come not from the videos, but from the voices of the women who lived through it. Behind the cameras, behind the headlines, were two women whose stories shook the courtroom. Cassie Ventura, once a rising star in Diddy's music label and his longtime girlfriend, was the first to take the stand. The other, known only as Jane, used a pseudonym to protect her identity, but both told stories that were eerily similar and painfully personal. They didn't claim to be trafficked in the traditional sense. They weren't kidnapped or chained. But what they did describe was a kind of invisible cage, one built from fear, control, and the immense power Diddy held over their careers and lives. Cassie told the jury that she didn't want to participate in the so-called freak-offs, but she did anyway. Why? Because saying no to Diddy wasn't an option. She described moments where she felt emotionally trapped, manipulated, and afraid. According to her testimony, Diddy's violent behavior wasn't occasional. It was regular, explosive, unpredictable. She said he had complete control over her finances, her music, and even her personal freedom. And then came the surveillance video. The prosecution introduced security footage from a 2016 hotel hallway, footage that hadn't been seen by the public until CNN released it in May 2024. It showed Cassie fleeing, disoriented and bruised. The silent video said what words sometimes can't. As for Jane, her testimony was equally harrowing. She told the court that she too was pressured into these drug-fueled sex encounters with strangers. And although she admitted to participating, she emphasized the fear that came with refusal, the sense that Diddy had full control and that stepping out of line could destroy her. The defense pushed back hard. They painted both women as opportunists, suggesting they were motivated by money and revenge, not truth. They argued that these weren't victims, but willing participants in a shared lifestyle that turned messy when emotions got involved. But the jury wasn't fully convinced, or fully dismissive. They didn't convict Diddy of sex trafficking. They didn't believe these women were legally forced into prostitution. But they also didn't ignore what they saw and heard. Their verdict walked a tightrope, one that reflected the complicated, often blurred lines of consent, power, and celebrity. And yet the most bizarre part was still to come. How the law itself, not the testimonies, not the violence, not the motive, became the very thing that tipped the scales against Diddy. Here's where things get surreal. In a move that stunned even veteran legal analysts, Diddy's defense shifted gears from denying the charges to defending the content. They weren't just saying he was innocent. They were saying what he filmed was art. According to the 62-page court filing his lawyers submitted, the videos shown in court, the same ones the prosecution called proof of exploitation, were actually amateur adult films, not crimes, not evidence, just expression. And that made them, in the defense's words, protected under the First Amendment. They described these videos as choreographed, artistic, and expressive, likening them to any other adult content legally produced and distributed in the U.S. The defense even went further, suggesting that what was shown in court was no different from what millions watch online, with one major exception. These were private. So why bring them to trial? Because, the defense argued, the government weaponized shame. They say prosecutors knew the videos would make the jury uncomfortable and used that discomfort to distract from the lack of clear legal violations. They claim it worked, that once the footage played, the jury's mind was made up, regardless of the law. But there's a darker side to this. The women in those videos testified that they were recorded without clear consent, and that Diddy later used those recordings as threats. They said he'd tell them not to cross him or the videos would go public. To them, these weren't films. They were leverage, power, control. So the question becomes, where's the line between personal freedom and emotional manipulation, between consensual filming and psychological blackmail? For the jury, that line was blurry, but not enough to convict on trafficking or coercion. And now, Diddy's legal team is trying to use that same blurriness to erase the conviction altogether. They're arguing that the government crossed the line, not him, by prosecuting personal sexual behavior, violating free expression, and twisting an old law to make it stick. It's a risky defense, a bold one, and if it works, it could set a dangerous precedent. But Diddy isn't just fighting the charge, he's fighting for freedom, and he's making his biggest move yet.
With a conviction hanging over him and sentencing set for October, most people would lay low and prepare for the worst. Not Diddy. Instead, he came out swinging, filing not one, but two explosive motions. One to overturn his conviction entirely, and another to walk free on a jaw-dropping $50 million bail while he waits for the judge's decision. And if the legal arguments weren't wild enough already, these filings took it to another level. His legal team argued that the entire case was built on emotion, not evidence. That the trial turned into a media circus designed to paint Diddy as a monster, not to deliver justice. And that once the more serious charges were thrown out, there was no reason to even keep the Mann Act convictions. They called it unprecedented, unconstitutional, a character assassination in disguise. But the request for bail, that's where things got truly intense. Because when Diddy asked the judge to release him from Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, the response was swift and deeply personal. Witnesses from the trial, including Cassie Ventura herself, submitted letters to the court, begging the judge to keep him behind bars. Their message was clear. If he's released, we're not safe. Cassie and others claimed that Diddy wasn't just a danger in the past, he was still a threat. That his money, influence, and connections could be used to retaliate, silence, or intimidate. They described a man who doesn't forget, doesn't forgive, and doesn't lose quietly. The government backed those concerns, saying Diddy had every reason to flee, and the means to do it. Private jets, international properties, millions in assets. If he wanted to disappear, he could. Diddy's team, of course, denied all of that. They said he's not a flight risk, that he wants to clear his name, not run from it, that the charges that landed him in jail were weak, and the fear being used against him was based on old wounds, not current danger. But the truth? Even now, the judge hasn't ruled. He's given prosecutors until the end of the week to respond, and until then, Diddy stays exactly where he is, locked up, waiting with everything on the line. Because this case isn't just about the past. It's about what comes next, not just for Diddy, but for the law itself. It's about who gets to control the story, and who pays the price when the cameras stop rolling. Sean Diddy Combs' legal battle is more than just a headline. It's a window into a world where fame, power, and the law collide in ways few of us ever see. Whether you think he's a victim of a flawed system or a man finally held accountable, one thing is clear. This case challenges everything we thought we knew about justice, consent, and celebrity culture. It forces us to ask tough questions. How much control should anyone have over another person's life? When does personal freedom cross the line into exploitation? And in a world obsessed with privacy and scandal, who really holds the power? As the final chapters of this story unfold, one thing is certain. The fallout will be felt far beyond the courtroom walls. So, what do you think? Is this a case of justice served, or a warning sign about the power of influence and the limits of the law? If you want to stay ahead of every twist in this story and other major celebrity legal dramas, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.